Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world so quiet, so slow, and so meticulously polite, it might just bore you right to sleep in the best possible way. You're not in your bed anymore. You're kneeling on a cushion in a small wooden room in Edo, the old name for Tokyo. Shoji screens slide closed behind you with a soft swish. Everything smells faintly of ink, cedar, and the roasted green tea someone brewed an hour ago and forgot to drink. The room is dim except for a shaft of light angling across the floor. A scribe sits cross, leg before a low desk, rubbing an ink stick in rhythmic circles across a wet inkstone. The sound is soothing, like someone slowly brushing swede. Thin rice paper lies stacked in neat, papery piles. There's no rush here. The air itself seems to move slowly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing when and where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The scribe's hand hovers over the page for a moment, then descends. The feued brush touches down like a crane's foot finding a pond. You watch in silent awe as the first kanji unfolds across the page in glossy black. It's oddly intimate to see someone writing like this, not scribbling but painting each word into existence. You don't speak Japanese, but it doesn't matter. This isn't about reading, it's about feeling. And right now, you feel like the pace of the world has shifted down a gear, or 5. It's the early 1800s, and we're in the final decades of the Edo period. Japan is at peace, mostly. The shogunate rules the land with strict control. Travel is regulated, weapons are licensed, and nobody sends an email. In fact, nobody sends an envelope. Not yet. Letters are the lifeblood of both government and romance. But there's a gentle artistry here. Letters aren't just written, they're folded with care and meaning. Think of it as communication origami, only less animal, shaped and more socially loaded. The scribe across from you is a professional. Maybe they copy documents for a merchant, or perhaps they ghostwrite love letters for a hopeless samurai. It's a real thing, by the way. Professional letter writers were common. You might think of it like hiring someone to text your crush for you, except with 18th century calligraphy and much higher stakes. Even choosing the right paper is an art form. Plain rice paper, acceptable. Handmade washi with fibers still visible, a flex. Stationery brushed with pale ink paintings of cranes or maple leaves. That's elite, tier aesthetic. A letter begins with visual poetry before a single word is even read. And if you think letter folding is just about neatness, think again. Each fold, slit, tuck, and corner carries meaning. An upward, pointing triangle on the final fold might indicate a respectful tone. A sharp crease might signal urgency or aggression. Historians still argue whether specific folds denoted class or gender, or whether they were more personal expressions. What's clear is that everyone who mattered knew the code. The scribe finishes the sentence and pauses to blow gently on the ink. You barely hear it, like the hush of wind through pine needles. Then, with 2 fingers and a calm precision that suggests years of practice, they lift the paper and begin to fold. The first fold is wide, the next narrower. The bottom edge flips up into a tab that tucks perfectly into a slit carved with a hair, thin blade. There's no glue, no wax seal, just physics, friction, and centuries of social training. Once folded, the letter is almost its own envelope, an elegant, papery puzzle box. Nearby, a second letter sits waiting to be delivered. It's addressed with the brushiest of strokes, a name, a title, maybe a poetic phrase, if the recipient's a fan of metaphors. And instead of a return address, there's often a crest, stylized and minimal, a kind of washi signature that lets the reader know exactly who it's from before unfolding a single flap. You wonder what's inside. Maybe it's a son writing to his father about the harvest. Maybe it's a student apologizing to his master for some failure. Maybe it's a samurai asking permission to marry someone wildly inappropriate. Whatever it is, the emotions are tucked inside like incense in a drawer, subtle but lingering. There's something romantic about this entire process. Not romance like candlelight and violins, but romance like quiet devotion, like taking the time to do something well just because it matters. You imagine your modern inbox 30, unread emails, half of them marked urgent, the rest regretful, and none of them folded with love. Even here in Edo, though, not every letter gets delivered. Some are intercepted. Some are never sent. Some are burned before they can ever be read. And some are kept, folded, and tucked away in lacquer boxes, safe like secrets, waiting to be remembered. Back in the room, the scribe is packing up. The brushes are washed, the inkstone emptied. They slide the finished letter into a bamboo tube and place it near the door for a courier to collect. The room is silent again. You almost want to bow in respect, but instead, you just keep watching, soaking in the stillness, letting the past unfold like the letter that just left. You slide forward a bit on your cushion, the tatami mat firm beneath your knees as the next piece of paper is unfurled. No, it's not origami, but it kind of feels like it wants to be. The scribe gently flattens the washi sheet, holding each corner down, as though asking it politely to stay put. And you're about to see that in Edo, period Japan, folding a letter wasn't just a matter of neatness. It was code. It was ceremony. It was kind of a big deal. Before there were envelopes, folds were everything. The very act of turning a flat sheet into a folded message carried meaning, just as much as the inked words inside. The practice is now called tado, or sometimes horikata, and it's not just functional, it's beautiful. You're witnessing the art of keeping a letter safe, sealed, and stylish, all in one smooth sequence of creases. Let's say you're writing a letter to a noble. You don't want it flopping around like some grocery list. You'd fold it tight, square the corners, and maybe add a little triangular flap at the end. Not origami. Nobody's turning this thing into a paper crane, but it's got finesse. And depending on how you folded it, you could signal tone, intention, or even the relationship between sender and receiver. The scribe demonstrates first, the sides come in, almost hugging the text. Then the bottom edge flips up, and the top folds down in a tight embrace. Finally, a corner is tucked under or a slit is made with a tiny blade, just deep enough to lock the layers in place. It's like letter, junga, satisfying, deliberate, and slightly anxiety-inducing if you think too hard about messing it up. What's fascinating is that these folds varied wildly. A merchant might fold in thirds, horizontally, to keep accounts private. A courtier might use a diagonal fold to emphasize elegance. And lovers, oh, they got creative. Diagonal folds wrapped in soft string, sealed with pressed flowers, or folded like a pouch. Each technique whispered a private message. It's folding as flirtation. Some modern researchers call it letterlocking, a term that's gotten trendy in academic circles. It's been used to describe how historical letters all over the world were secured without wax or glue. Japan's version? Unquestionably the most graceful. But historians still argue whether Edo-Era folds had rigid rules, or if they evolved organically through culture and circumstance. Kind of like the difference between MLA citation and that essay format your high school teacher made up. You reach for a folded letter resting near the scribe's elbow. It's pale blue with darker flecks, maybe indigo fibers from the dye process. You try to unfold it, but instantly regret the decision. The folds don't open logically. It's not intuitive. It's like trying to refold a map, but in reverse. You wonder how anyone ever mastered this, and then remember they practiced for years. In samurai households, girls were sometimes trained in calligraphy and folding as part of their domestic education. Not just to be ladylike, but to communicate with grace. A misfolded letter could be interpreted as carelessness, or worse, disrespect. And in government service, clerks were expected to fold reports, according to strict bureaucratic protocols. Mess up the fold? You might not get fired, but your memo probably gets ignored. And in Edo bureaucracy, being ignored was a death sentence. Of your career, anyway. But here's a fun tidbit: folding wasn't always just about delivery. Some people folded letters to make them hard to read without detection. There's evidence that certain types of creases and tucks made it painfully obvious if someone had peeked. Kind of like a wax seal, but made entirely of paper. Low-tech security system, Edo style. One example involved a long, skinny fold with a tab inserted into a slit that was only made after the letter had been folded. To open it, you had to tear the slit or perform some papery gymnastics to wiggle it out. Either way, the recipient could tell, "This message's cherry has been popped." Not a great look if you're a ninja spy trying to read sensitive correspondence. You take another letter and try to mimic the scribe's folding. It's humbling. Your first attempt looks like a crumpled dumpling. Your second looks like a sad paper wallet. The scribe, ever patient, guides your hands. Here, they might say, "Make this fold sharp, like you're in law's tone in a holiday letter." You chuckle softly. Paper humor. Over time, people developed fold patterns suited for different purposes. Some letters were meant to be stacked, so they folded flat. Others needed to hold small enclosures, like coins, tokens, or even sachets of scent, so they folded into boxy little pockets. And because there were no official postal standards, folding techniques became a kind of silent dialect. You didn't just read a letter. You read how it was folded. One fold, nicknamed the shell wrap, cradled the contents like a clamshell, often used in aristocratic circles. Another, the boat fold, resembled the prow of a ship, supposedly used when a letter traveled far. Whether those names are modern inventions or authentic period terms is up for debate. Historians still argue whether such fold names were recorded or retroactively applied by enthusiasts with too much time and access to museum archives. Either way, you can't help but admire the elegance and the silence. Folding is a quiet language, a whisper between pages. And in a world without envelopes, text messages, or autocorrect, it was everything. You glance up at the scribe, who now folds their own letter with absent-minded precision. Their fingers move like dancers in slow motion. No hesitation, just motion and memory. And you think, maybe this isn't boring after all. Maybe this is what focus looks like. What care feels like. You place your third attempt down with a sigh. It's lumpy, but it's yours. And tonight, that's enough. You're beginning to understand that Edo-Era letter folding wasn't just clever. It was clever and secure. You lean forward as the scribe brings out a small stack of already sealed letters. Each one is a folded wonder, locked shut with nothing but tucks, tension, and technique. No wax, no tape, no sticker that says, "Do not read unless you're Tadashi from accounting." Just paper, folded like a secret. The practice is now studied under the strangely exciting term, letter locking, which sounds like something a Victorian hacker would do. But this is older, quieter, and dare we say, paperier. Take a closer look. One letter has a neat corner tab, twisted ever so slightly into a reverse fold, held tight by a slot that wasn't part of the original sheet. The only way to open it cleanly is to reverse engineer the whole thing. Any fumbling, and you're left with a crumpled mess. Try to cheat and unfold from the wrong end. Good luck. You'll crease something that definitely wasn't meant to crease, and the reader will know. It's the papercraft version of, "This bottle's safety seal is broken." These were more than neat tricks. They were real security. Letter locking protected messages in a society where trust was a delicate thing. Not everyone had access to wax or seals. Samurai households might, but commoners. They had folding, and folding alone. One letter stands out. Its final flap is held in place by a tiny slit, no larger than a grain of rice. Slide the tab out without tearing it. You've earned your spy badge. Mess it up. You just committed papery seppuku. That slit isn't decorative. It's a tamper, evident mechanism. Break it, and you've broadcast your noseness to the world. And that family crest? Did you notice it? Pressed faintly in the paper with a woodblock, barely visible until the light hits it just right. It's not there for beauty alone. It tells the reader who sent the letter, and whether they're worth listening to. Like a medieval LinkedIn endorsement, but with more honor and less humble bragging. Historians still argue whether all these techniques were standard or improvised. Was there a manual somewhere? A training scroll titled 100 Tactical Paper Folds for the Edo Cordis? Possibly. Some evidence suggests that court scribes and bureaucrats had handbooks detailing official folding protocols. Others say these styles evolved through imitation and apprenticeship, like origami, passed hand to hand, crease, by crease rather than by strict rule. There's even debate about how much of this was aesthetic versus functional. Were these folds chosen to look elegant or to hide emotional vulnerability? You know, the Edo version of putting a sad emoji behind a lock screen. Some scholars suggest that different social classes favored different folds not just because of tradition, but because of trust. A merchant's simple side fold might say, "I'm open and honest." A complicated triangular tuck might say, "Back off, unless you really need to read this." The scribe begins unfolding one of the sealed examples, ever so gently. It's like watching someone peel the world's most delicate banana. Inside, a brief note, just a few lines, not dramatic, not even romantic, but folded with reverence, like the message itself was sacred. You can't help but be moved. It's the paper equivalent of whispering a thought to someone who actually listens. There's a curious story here too. In some cases, messengers were instructed not to deliver letters to anyone but the recipient. That meant handing it directly to the hands it was meant for. No middleman. Why? Because the sender could tell if the folds had been fiddled with. A single wrong crease, and the lie unraveled like a bad haircut. It made privacy less about technology and more about craftsmanship. One infamous anecdote, likely exaggerated, but deliciously so, involves a feudal lord receiving a folded message during a tense negotiation. The fold was wrong, just subtly off. Suspicious, the lord refused to open it, claiming it had already been read. The courier denied everything. Tension rose, swords were drawn, and the letter, still folded, still unread, all over a suspicious flap. Could it have been a simple mistake? Perhaps. Historians still argue whether it was paranoia, sabotage, or just a clumsy fold from a nervous clerk. You'd think that by now someone would have invented an easier way. But this was Japan, and tradition often trumped convenience. Besides, these folds weren't just about utility. They were a kind of communication themselves. A paper handshake, a crease, coded bow. Even now, as you watch the scribe demonstrate yet another intricate fold and lock technique, you realize something. This was the Edo equivalent of digital encryption. No two folds were exactly the same. Each sender had their habits, their stylistic tells. Unfolding a letter meant more than just reading. It meant deciphering intent, emotion, tone, class, and care. And once read, these letters were often folded back. Carefully, lovingly. Just as they had arrived. You didn't crumple them. You didn't toss them. You refolded them, honored the paper, and maybe slipped it into a lacquer box for safekeeping. Somewhere out there, in dusty archives and private attics, are thousands of these folds still intact, still locked, still waiting. Your eyelids feel heavier now. Not bored. Just calmed. Like each crease in the paper has smoothed a crease in your thoughts. Folded messages. Locked thoughts. Silent whispers wrapped in washi. And you, sitting here, still unfolding the story. The brush returns to the page, and this time, you pay close attention to its rhythm. It dips into the inkstone with a faint splat, then rises like a heron poised above a pond. The tip lands on the paper and glides forward, bold, yet cautious. Every stroke carries the weight of intention. This isn't handwriting. This is calligraphy. More than that, it's a performance, and you've got front row seats. Writing a letter in Edo-Era Japan wasn't a chore, it was a ceremony. You didn't just grab a pen and fire off a message about forgetting the rice again. You prepared. Carefully. Like a chef sharpening knives before slicing sashimi. The ink had to be just right, not too watery, not too thick. That meant grinding the ink's stick in circular motions, adding drops of water from a tiny bamboo ladle, and checking the mixture like you're making soup for a shogun. And the brush. Oh, the brush. A food, often made from animal hair and bamboo. It responded to pressure and angle like a musical instrument. One wrong move, and your graceful kanji turns into a blob that looks like an inky sneeze. No backspace key, no whiteout, just you, a sheet of very absorbent paper, and centuries of aesthetic expectations. There's a reason letters often began with seasonal greetings or poetic flourishes. It wasn't just etiquette, it was warm up. Get the brush flowing, the wrist loose. The spring plum blossoms dance under moonlight. You might write, not because you care that much about plum blossoms, but because, yo, what's up, wasn't considered elegant. Your scribe demonstrates a character, slow, deliberate, serene. The brush pauses between strokes, allowing each to dry a little before continuing. That prevents smudging, of course, but it also makes the whole process feel like meditation. You breathe in as the ink soaks into the paper. You breathe out as the brush lifts. The room is so quiet, you can hear the faintest rustle of your own sleeve, and then it happens. A mistake. The brush slips, just a hair. The stroke wobbles where it should be clean. The character looks sad. You brace for some dramatic outburst, or perhaps the scribe throwing themselves into the koi pond in shame. But no. They sigh. They pause. They slide that sheet aside and begin again. No flinching. Just acceptance. Because in Edo, imperfection was part of the art. Wabi, sabi, remember. Beauty and impermanence. In the imperfect. Even your mistake, stained letter could be saved, turned into practice material or reused for drafts. Waste not, want not. Especially when good washi paper wasn't exactly cheap. Fun fact. Some scribes deliberately added a tiny flaw in the letter, especially if it was for a romantic interest. Why? To show sincerity. I wrote this for you, not some mass-produced masterpiece. It's like handwriting your crush's name in your notebook and accidentally crossing out a letter, then just rolling with it. Authenticity counts. But writing wasn't only for poetry and pillow talk. It was a lifeline. Merchants wrote orders. Farmers wrote tax appeals. Ronin, masterless samurai, wrote long, rambling letters about their existential crisis. Okay, maybe not all of them, but you can imagine. Still, writing took time. You couldn't just jot off a note while standing in line at the soba shop. You had to set the space, prepare the tools, and, most importantly, center your mind. Think of it as the Edo version of Inbox Zero, but with more ink stains and fewer up-a-deeds. Writing was also intensely personal. Your brushwork, your phrasing, even your spacing, each was a fingerprint of your soul. People judged you on it. Was your script flowing and soft? You were sensitive, maybe poetic. Was it angular and upright? Dutiful? Were your characters crammed in like sardines? Either you were too emotional, or just really bad at estimating space. Historians still argue whether certain styles were taught based on gender. Did women learn one way and men another? Some scholars believe female calligraphy emphasized elegance and curve, while male styles leaned toward austerity. Others suggest it was more a matter of class and education. Either way, if your script looked sloppy, your reader would assume your thoughts were too. And yes, there were schools for this. Entire academies of calligraphy, where students spent years mastering the shape of a single character. Imagine training your whole life to write dear. Sir. Just write. It sounds exhausting, or possibly peaceful. Because once you got it right, it was like magic. The brush seemed to float. Your thoughts appeared on the page like ripples on water. And the more you wrote, the more you slowed down. The more you focused, the more you breathed. It was mindfulness before the word existed. Some monks and scholars even treated letter writing as spiritual practice. A letter wasn't just correspondence, it was a moment preserved, a record of thought, a physical echo of emotion. That's why even now, old Edo letters are kept in temples, museums, and private collections, not because they're flashy, but because they matter to someone. You reach for the brush. Your fingers tremble slightly as you try to mimic a simple stroke. It's harder than it looks. The ink spreads too fast, and your line is, well, enthusiastic. The scribe chuckles softly and hands you another sheet. Try again. That's the lesson. And you do. Because here, in this quiet room, the world doesn't need to move fast. It only needs to move with care. You're seated now by a latticed window, the soft scent of cherry blossoms drifting in on a slow spring breeze. Somewhere outside, a bell tolls the hour mark, maybe. But here in this paper, scented quiet, time is mostly irrelevant. A new letter is being folded across from you, and this one's different. Thinner paper. A little extra perfume. The scribe smiles faintly. Ah, yes, a love letter. Don't expect bold declarations and Shakespearean speeches. This is Edo Japan, after all. Romance is quiet, suggestive, hidden in metaphors, and, more importantly, hidden in how the letter is folded. Love letters in this period were like verbal origami. They revealed more when unfolded carefully. You watch as the letter is written in a softer, more flowing script. There's a seasonal reference up top. The plum blossoms persist even through the chill. Not exactly. I can't stop thinking about you. But if you read between the brushstrokes, it's basically the same thing. These letters were often laced with layers of indirect language. Why? Because directness wasn't considered romantic. The slower the reveal, the sweeter the message, and then comes the folding, a tender, secretive process. There's no standard here. Every lover might invent their own fold, like a personal dialect in crease and flap. One common technique, folding the letter into a slim, vertical packet, then wrapping it in a second decorative paper, tied with a silk thread. The outer paper might be pale pink, or printed with soft patterns, pine needles, cranes, or falling blossoms. More than a protective layer, as it was a message in itself. I took the time to make this beautiful for you, but it wasn't just about pretty folds. Some were used to hide the letter entirely. Secret lovers, after all, had to be clever. There are tales, half legend, half truth, of girls slipping folded letters into the sleeves of kimono, or tucking them inside hair ornaments. Others were passed under door screens at night, the rustle of the paper quieter than footsteps. Historians still argue whether there were standardized love folds, or if couples developed their own folding code. What's certain is that certain folds carried unmistakable meanings. A sharp triangle on the front flap might say, "For your eyes only." An envelope, like seal formed by overlapping corners, could signal urgency or longing. You hold one of these folded packets now. It's warm from the scribe's hands. You don't dare open it, though you're dying to peek. There's a gravity to it. Not because it contains scandalous secrets, but because it holds someone's carefully shaped emotion. It's intimacy in paper form. Of course, not all love letters were met with delight. Sometimes they caused trouble. In a society where arranged marriages were the norm and romance was inconvenient, unsolicited letters could spark drama. One recorded case involved a samurai's daughter receiving a folded letter from a low-ranked page. Her mother intercepted it. The fold, a slightly forward tucked triangle, was unfamiliar, suspicious. The letter never reached its intended recipient. The boy? Let's just say he was reassigned to a colder province. But sometimes letters worked their slow magic. Two people exchanging words, fold by fold, over months or even years. One old tale tells of a woman who kept every letter from her distant lover, unfolding and refolding them so many times the paper grew soft, like cloth. When he finally returned, she didn't say much. She simply handed him the bundle. The folds had spoken for her all along. And remember, there were no texts, no voicemails, No casual flirts via emoji. These letters were everything. They were daydreams folded into paper. And for some, they were the only connection to someone they couldn't see. Imagine waiting 3 weeks for a letter to arrive, unfolding it in breathless anticipation, only to find it says, "The moon was full, and I thought of your face?" A little cryptic, sure. But in context, devastatingly romantic. One quirky detail. It wasn't unheard of for lovers to include tiny pressed flowers, bits of fabric, or even perfume sachets in their folds. Imagine receiving a letter that smells faintly of white plum blossoms, or worse, the same scent your mother wears. Romantic risk-taking at its finest. Also, the timing of delivery mattered. Messengers were often tipped to deliver letters at specific hours. Late evening being the most common for clandestine notes, you couldn't just walk up to someone and hand over a folded love confession during rice inspection. No, you paid the delivery boy and hoped he wasn't too curious or clumsy. Letter folding also offered plausible deniability. Oh, this, just a report about temple donations. Wink. You could hide a flirtation inside bureaucratic-looking folds. Perfect for lovers in delicate situations. The origami of secrecy. Even after relationships ended, letters were rarely destroyed. Too precious. Too personal. Some women were known to keep them in elaborate lacquered boxes, reopening them years later to refold, reread, and remember, each crease a fingerprint of a feeling once felt. And now, as the scribe slides the final flap into place, and knots the silk thread gently, you understand. Folding was never just folding. It was sculpting time and emotion into something holdable, tactile, private, something you could press to your heart when no one was looking. You smile. Somewhere between the paper layers and the brushstrokes, there's a love story, maybe even a few. The room feels different now. Less dreamy, more official. The scribe has changed posture. Knees squared, back straight, and the paper in front of them is thicker, slightly stiffer. This isn't a love letter. This is bureaucracy. Welcome to the paperwork of the Edo period, petitions, decrees, and reports, all folded with the same care, but now with a little more tension. You're about to see how the art of folding got serious. Imagine a daimyo, the lord of a domain, receiving 10 letters in a morning. No email filters, no assistants pre-reading them. Just a courier bowing deeply and handing over a stack of precisely folded paper. How did the Lord know what to open first? He didn't read the handwriting. He read the folds. In Edo, Japan, the way a document was folded told you everything. Is this urgent? Confidential? From someone important or a little too confident? These weren't just paper logistics. These were cultural signals, as unspoken as a raised eyebrow. The scribe demonstrates a formal report fold. It starts with a vertical fold inward, then a crisp horizontal tuck at the bottom. There's a slight triangular flap at the top, neat and symmetrical. This wasn't a matter of preference. It was protocol. If you were submitting a petition or an official complaint, this was the fold. Deviate from it, and your message might be dismissed, or worse, returned with a note implying you should reconsider your tone. For reports up the chain of command, scribes sometimes added paper wrappers called tamagami. These outer sheets were like bureaucratic armor. Blank, color coded for rank, sometimes stamped with a clan crest. Their folds mirrored the hierarchy, tighter for lower rank senders, looser for high officials whose status allowed a little breathing room. Literally, historians still argue whether there were strict national folding rules or if domains had local customs. Some evidence points to official folding manuals issued within certain offices. Others suggest that scribes learned by example, imitating the folds of respected elders like apprentices in a sushi kitchen. And you better believe mistakes had consequences. A misplaced flap could insult a superior. A report folded like a personal letter. Scandalous. One documented incident involved a junior retainer folding a supply request like a love letter, with diagonal corners and a perfumed paper wrapper. Was it a joke, a protest, or just a spectacular misreading of etiquette? The records don't say, but the retainer was reassigned to canal maintenance, which is Edo speak for "you're in the mud now, buddy." Folding was also used to enforce secrecy. Sensitive documents, especially those related to taxes, discipline, or criminal reports, were folded in complex ways that revealed tampering. Tabs tucked into slits, flaps that had to be removed in a specific order, and all without glue or string, just geometry and tradition. One clever method involved folding the paper into an envelope with overlapping corners, then sealing it with a drop of water. Yes, water. When it dried, the fibers swelled, locking the folds. To open it, you had to rehydrate the spot just so, or rip it open, which left a clear mark. Primitive? Maybe? Brilliant. Absolutely. Some scribes even used inkless creases to convey side messages. For example, an extra ridge across the bottom might mean, "Please expedite." A tiny dimple in the top fold. "Raid privately." It was a tactile language, invisible unless you knew what to feel for. You hold a folded bureaucratic letter. It's heavier than the others. Inside, you know it likely contains an update on rice yields or a border dispute with a neighboring domain. Thrilling stuff, but the real message is already there in your hands. The rigidity. The balance. The weight, you feel the chain of command in your fingers. And bureaucrats weren't the only ones using fold code. Even regular folks writing to the local magistrate, maybe to report a theft or appeal a tax, had to follow the rules. There were temple scribes who offered folding services for a fee. Make it polite, but not desperate, a client might say. Urgent, but not pushy. Paper diplomacy. There's even a recorded instance of a fold-related prank. A low-ranking court clerk folded a birthday greeting for his superior using a funeral letter pattern. The clerk claimed innocence, but let's just say his birthday invitation the next year got lost. By now, you're beginning to understand. Edo Japan didn't need email subject lines or colored folders. It had folds, and everyone knew how to read them. The scribe places the completed report into a cloth pouch. It's going to be delivered to a government office in the city center. The pouch is marked with a family crest. Inside, the letter sits like a sealed vault. Not because of the words, but because of the way they're folded. The information is safe. The hierarchy is maintained. And you sit back, amazed at how something so quiet, so gentle, could carry such sharp precision. Folding, you now realize, was not just an art. It was power. Outside the study, the day has grown brighter. The shadows of paper screens are sharper now, and distant sounds begin to float through the walls. Vendors calling out prices, clogs clicking on stone, and somewhere far off, the padded footfalls of someone with purpose. That someone is a hakiyaku, a courier. Possibly running, definitely sweating, and carrying your folded letter in a bamboo tube tucked across his back. Welcome to the physical world of message delivery. No pigeons, no postboxes, just humans with strong calves and time-sensitive documents. You peek out the door as a courier stops briefly at the gate. His robe is tied tightly, his forehead glistens, and he bows quickly before accepting the parcel. Then, like a wind-up doll with excellent cardio, he takes off at a trot. No bike, no horse, just straw sandals and determination. In Edo, Japan, most couriers were runners, literal runners. They covered dozens of miles per day, zigzagging through towns and mountain passes to connect families, lords, and bureaucracies. These weren't leisure jogs. They were sweaty, short-legged marathons, often completed under a ticking social clock, and always with their letters folded and sealed tightly in tubes, pouches, or sleeves. There were different kinds of couriers, depending on what or who you were delivering for. The shogunate had its official postal system, with relay stations set up along highways. Private citizens had to rely on hired hands, trusted apprentices, or merchant networks. Messengers were paid per distance, per weight, and sometimes per discretion. Want your letter delivered quietly? That costs extra. Historians still argue whether some messengers were trained to detect tampering by checking the tension of a folded letter. Did they learn to spot a broken crease or a fold done too quickly? Some scholars say yes, others believe couriers weren't allowed to look at the contents at all. The truth likely varied. What's known is that a courier's reputation was everything. If your folded letter arrived mangled or suspiciously opened, your name got passed around for the wrong reasons. One odd tidbit: messengers often carried bells. Tiny bells attached to their sash or tube. Why? To warn people they were coming, so others would get out of the way. Imagine a FedEx guy jingling through town with a top knot and zero brakes. Effective, if not subtle. But it wasn't always about speed. Some letters were meant to take their time, arriving on a specific date, or even during a particular phase of the moon. Love letters especially. A moonlit delivery carried romantic flair, even if the messenger was less. Mysterious stranger, and more. Exhausted teenager with a side hustle. The scribe explains that couriers were trained in how to carry letters depending on importance. Urgent documents, held close to the chest, under layers of clothing. Formal reports, carried in lacquered containers, slung across the shoulder. Casual notes, tucked in the obi belt. Neat, but not too precious. The method sent a message before the message was even read. The actual path these runners took could be wild. Over mountain passes, through forests, across rivers. Japan's Gokade. The 5 major highways were dotted with inns and post stations. Couriers would sprint to one station, hand off the letter, and the next runner would pick it up, relay, race style. The system was surprisingly fast. Some urgent letters reached Edo from Kyoto in as little as 4 days. That's 300 miles, on foot, with no energy bars. One wrote, "The T-Cade was so popular that artists made woodblock prints of its scenic post towns." Imagine a courier pausing just long enough to admire a view of NT Fuji before jogging off again. Letter snug and dry in its case, fold still intact. There were even express couriers for the rich and powerful. These elite messengers had high-quality sandals, better food allowances, and occasionally, brace yourself, horses. Yes, the lucky few could ride. But even then, the fold had to survive the journey. Bumps, rain, dust. Folded letters were remarkably resilient. That's part of why they were folded the way they were: compact, layered, and self-protecting. You watch the road now, and for a second, you spot a dot on the horizon. Another messenger, bent forward. Focused. You wonder what he's carrying. A father's scolding words to a distant son. A merchant's apology to a wronged partner. Or maybe, just maybe, a folded confession, sealed tight, desperately hoping to be read and understood. In one famous tale, a messenger was entrusted with a samurai's final letter. Written before battle, folded with the utmost care. The courier was ordered to deliver it even if the sender died. And he did. He dodged bandits, crossed a river during a flood, and delivered the still, pristine letter to the samurai's mother. It had a triangular fold with the family crest pressed into the edge. The letter itself? Simple. "I did not die in vain." One fold. One life. It's these kinds of stories that make you appreciate the layers, both literal and emotional, in each fold. Because someone not only wrote that message, someone ran with it. Someone protected it. Someone made sure it arrived folded just so. And now, as the scribe seals another packet and prepares to hand it off, you feel it. This wasn't just an old world postal system. It was a relay of trust, sweat, and silent language, and all of it bound in folds. You shuffle forward as the scribe excuses themselves. One moment, they seem to say with a bow, and step outside. And now, with a rare break in the folding, your gaze drifts to the paper itself. It's not just any paper. This is washi, Japan's traditional handmade paper. And if you thought folding it was a quiet art, just wait until you see how it's made. Let's head upstream. Literally. Washi begins in a river, or at least near one. Not because the paper grows there, although wouldn't that be convenient, but because clean, cold water is essential. The best washi is made from the bark of the paper mulberry tree, or kyozo. And before it ever becomes a canvas for ink, that bark has to be boiled, beaten, rinsed, and strained with monk, like patience. Picture this: a snowy mountain village, probably in Gifu or Shimane, where artisans gather bundles of kazo branches. They steam them in wooden vats, strip the bark by hand, and hang it to dry like strands of fibrous spaghetti. Once dry, the outer bark is scraped off, leaving the soft white inner layer, the good stuff. Historians still argue whether the original techniques were homegrown or adapted from Chinese papermaking, which reached Japan in the 7th century. Regardless, the Japanese version became distinct thinner, stronger, and softer, like linen made of clouds. Some washi is translucent. Some is textured with bits of leaves or flower petals. Some is pressed with mica to catch the light. And none of it comes out of a printer tray. Once the fibers are clean, they're pounded into pulp. Traditionally, this was done with mallets. Now, sometimes by machine, but still with care. That pulp is mixed with water and a gooey plant-based mucilage called neri, which helps suspend the fibers evenly. Here comes the magic. The papermaker scoops the slurry with a bamboo screen, called a sew, and lifts it, letting the water drain. This part is slow, gentle, repetitive. They swish it forward, back, side to side, again, and again, and again. It's a kind of watery choreography, and the goal is even fiber distribution. They repeat the process, layering the pulp, creating a single sheet. Then it's pressed, dried, and sometimes brushed onto wooden boards to sun dry naturally. The result: a sheet of washi with irregular edges, subtle texture, and impossible grace. It bends without breaking. It folds like it remembers how. You pick up a fresh sheet. It's feather light, yet it feels alive. You can see tiny threads, flecks, and maybe even a hair from the papermaker's sleeve. Accidental DNA in the material. It's no exaggeration to say each sheet is unique. Some people collect washi like wine, admiring its age, region, and color. In the Edo period, paper quality spoke volumes. Thick washi with visible fibers suggested luxury and status. Thin, almost sheer paper showed refinement, and sometimes flirtation. Letters folded in translucent paper hinted at vulnerability, or perhaps at secrets barely concealed. Practical, maybe not. Gorgeous, absolutely. Quirky fact: some elite papers were scented. Yes, scented. Artisans infused the fibers with incense like sandalwood or plum blossom. The recipient would unfold the letter and inhale not just the writer's words, but their fragrance. Imagine opening a note that smells like spring or temple incense. Paper flirting, olfactory edition. But not all washi was romantic. Some was used for government records, temple accounts, or even wrapping fish at the market. Quality varied, and papermakers had specialties. There were even regional rivalries. Ozu-washi, from Aim, for instance, was prized for its strength. Mino-washi, from Gifu, was considered top tier for its delicate beauty. There were paper guilds, paper taxes, paper drama, and yes, people sometimes reused washi. Old letters were refolded into practice paper. Mistakes were burned or soaked and repulped. There was no such thing as disposable in the Edo mindset. If you had to crumple a letter, you crumpled it with intention. You watch as an apprentice enters the study, arms full of freshly pressed sheets. The stack steams faintly in the cool air, still warm from the drying boards. The texture isn't just aesthetic, it's practical. That slight tooth grips ink better. Brushstrokes don't slide around like on glossy paper. And when folded, it remembers the creases, holds its shape, resists tearing at the fold lines. You're beginning to realize that Edo letter folding couldn't exist without this miracle material. Modern scholars marvel at how many historical letters survive intact. Not because people stored them carefully, though some did, but because washi endures. It's resistant to insect damage. It breathes. It ages slowly. And when it ages, it yellows softly, like an old scroll whispering, "I'm still here." You feel the edge of the paper under your finger. It's soft, like suede, and still slightly damp from the humidity in the room. You fold one corner gently. It holds. You unfold it again. The crease lingers, not harsh but present. It's like folding a memory. And now, as the scribe returns, bowing apologetically, you realize you've just spent a half hour admiring paper. Not writing, not even the folding, just the blank, beautiful possibility of it. Only in Edo, the fresh stack of washi rests beside you, faintly aromatic, faintly intimidating. You reach toward it, but the scribe stops you with a quiet gesture. Not yet. These sheets aren't just for anyone. They are pre-selected, each one chosen like a fine kimono for the message it will wear. Tonight's next lesson isn't about folding or writing. It's about stationery. Because in Edo, period Japan, your paper said, as much as your pen ever could. You might think a letter is just words on paper, but back then, the paper was the message. Its weight, texture, size, scent, and design. All clues to who you were and how much you cared. Sending a message on cheap paper. Might as well shout, I barely tried. Send it on handmade washi embossed with your family crest and sprinkled with mica. Now you're making a statement. Stationery in the Edo-Era was a quiet status symbol. For samurai, merchants, courtiers, and even, well, to townsfolk, fine paper was a form of soft power. Delicate, expensive, and unmistakable. And if you had any social standing to uphold, you didn't just grab the nearest sheet. You selected. You curated. The scribe draws your attention to a wooden case, lacquered black with gold accents. Inside are compartments, each filled with a different kind of paper. Some are dyed pale blue or tea, stained beige. Others have flecks of silver leaf or faint ink paintings of birds in flight. You see one with a faint pine branch in the corner, another with a moon peeking behind a misty cloud. They are exquisite and totally impractical for your electric bill. One standout sheet carries a pressed chrysanthemum in its corner. This isn't just decor. It's a seasonal nod. In Japan, referencing the time of year in a letter was both poetic and polite. Sending plum, blossom stationery in winter. Timely. Sending it in August. That's social hara-kiri. People took this seriously. Some paper had textures mimicking fabric, crinkled like crepe, or ridged like bamboo slats. Others were subtly perfumed. Yes, we're back to scented stationery. Paper might be dusted with plum blossom or sandalwood powder and kept in sealed boxes with incense to soak up fragrance over time. You didn't even have to open the letter to know someone cared. Historians still argue whether scent types were linked to emotions, like pine for longing or orange blossom for gratitude. Some suggest there were regional scent preferences, others believe it was personal taste. Either way, the paper didn't just carry ink. It carried atmosphere. Even the shape of the sheet mattered. Most letters were written on long, vertical paper called tatagami, which you'd fold lengthwise like a scroll. Formal documents might be wider, more squared. Casual letters, shorter and narrower. And then there were tanzaku, slender strips used for poems or short notes. Sending one meant, I wrote a thought, not a paragraph, but the real flex, custom paper. Wealthy households could order washi with their man, family crest, printed or pressed into the corner. These crests were like aristocratic avatars, 3 hollyhock leaves, a wheel of water, a circle of stars. They weren't just decorative, they told the reader, this comes from someone. Think of it like sending an email from a verified account, only it smells like incense and can be folded into a crane. And while samurai might favor stoic designs, bamboo, cranes, geometric patterns, merchants often embraced bolder styles. Some even printed poems or proverbs in watermark form, only visible when held to light. Because why just write poetry when your paper can whisper it, too? You reach for a sheet with cloud like swirls in pale gold. It's almost too pretty to use. The scribe nods and hands you a companion envelope. Also handmade, dyed with indigo. You smell it. A hint of cedar, maybe. You wonder who would be worthy of receiving such a letter. But this wasn't just a one-way impression. Recipients judged the paper. Did it arrive wrinkled, folded with care? Was it appropriate for the season, for the occasion? One poorly chosen sheet could doom a marriage proposal or stall a business deal. This was high-stakes stationery. There's even a story of a courtesan rejecting a client not because of his words, but because he sent them on common paper. If he won't invest in his message, she allegedly said, "Why should I invest in him?" Harsh, but fair. Paper spoke first. A fringe tradition. Some households kept boxes of received letters sorted by sender. Not by content, mind you, but by paper. Lovers' letters were refolded and tucked away according to scent, style, or season. A quiet archive of feelings, documented in creases and clouds. One historian found a stash of 19th century letters folded into tiny rectangles and stacked by hue. Soft browns in one box, floral patterns in another. The letters inside weren't always romantic, but the storage method was intimate. Like keeping someone's handwriting in a jar of light. You sit back, surrounded by paper, not blank pages, but silent biographies. Each one speaks of the sender before the message is read. Rich paper. Thin paper. Crisp, faded, floral, clean. And as the scribe prepares a new message, carefully matching paper to mood, you understand in Edo, Japan, writing didn't begin with ink. It began with paper that whispered who you were. The table is cleared now, the inkstone refreshed, and the scribe stretches their wrists with a practiced roll. A new letter is about to be written. This one, you're told, is personal, something polite but emotional. A note to a distant cousin about an uncle's illness. The kind of message that requires care not just in wording, but in how it's folded. Because tonight's lesson is one of etiquette. And in Edo, period Japan, the wrong fold could speak louder than your words ever could. The scribe selects a modest sheet of washi. Not too thick, not too floral. The kind of paper that says, "I respect you, but this is not a wedding invitation." Then, as the brush begins to glide across the page, you notice something new spacing. The lines are not crammed. They float. Each one gently bows beneath the one above, like a procession of courtiers. Once finished, the scribe places the brush down and begins folding. But this isn't freestyle. This is etiquette choreography. Let's say you're writing a personal letter to a friend, an equal, maybe someone younger. You might start with a book fold, a horizontal crease, then fold it into thirds like a pamphlet. Neat, casual, respectful. It opens easily, no dramatic reveal, like a friendly knock on a door. But if you're writing a formal letter to someone older, higher in rank, or a total stranger, you switch to the tatami fold. This style resembles folded tatami mats, a long vertical panel folded inwards from both sides, then closed with a crisp top to bottom crease. It feels more serious, more enclosed. It says, "I'm entering your space humbly. You try one of each." The casual fold feels natural, like closing a menu. The formal one, it feels deliberate, like tucking away a secret. You can almost feel the hierarchy in your fingertips. Now comes the detail work. Is the final flap pointing up or down? Is there a corner tucked inward, or folded cleanly across? These things matter. One classic etiquette rule: don't leave the tip of the final flap pointing outward. It looks aggressive, almost rude. Fold it inward, and it becomes gentle, humble. A visual bow. Historians still argue whether every fold had strict meanings or just general vibes. Some manuals from the time show standardized folds for specific messages. Birth announcements, condolence letters, even debt forgiveness. Others suggest the rules were looser, relying on shared cultural instinct rather than rigid codification. What's clear is that you didn't just fold and hope for the best. One memorable fox pas, a minor samurai folded his letter of apology like a merchant's invoice. Flat, square, no triangle at the end. The recipient, a senior retainer, was deeply unimpressed. He writes to seek forgiveness. He reportedly said, but his folds show entitlement. The apology was rejected. Lesson learned. The quirks didn't stop at formality. Gender played a role too, at least sometimes. Female writers were often taught to use softer folds, rounded corners, and more intricate closures. Men tended toward simpler folds, sharp creases, and minimal flair. But that wasn't universal. Plenty of women, Especially literate wives of samurai adopted the firm folds of formal reports, and some male poets, they folded like florists. You practice again, this time with a scenario writing to your older brother, a traveling merchant. The tone, respectful, warm. The fold. Two side creases inward, a top flap tucked snugly. Balanced but not stiff. You press it closed with a breath there. A crease that says, I miss you, but I'm not desperate. Even the method of handing off the letter had its etiquette. Do you place it directly in someone's hand? Only if you're equals. Otherwise, you offer it on a tray, bowing slightly. If the recipient is of much higher status, you leave the letter folded on a low table and retreat. No eye contact. Just paper diplomacy. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some schools of tea ceremony included instruction on letter folding. Why? Because correspondence was considered part of one's spiritual and aesthetic discipline. Folding a letter well was like arranging flowers or pouring tea. It showed refinement of soul. There's also the curious custom of folding letters for delivery without reading them. Common among scribes. A client would dictate a message, the scribe would write it, and then, out of discretion, they'd fold it without ever scanning the words. That's trust. Or possibly just very good acting. A small pile of examples now rests on the table, each folded slightly differently. One formal, one casual, one morning letter, folded with the flap turned in and no decorations. It's somber, quiet. Even the paper is unpatterned, plain beige. In Edo, grief had its own visual dialect. You notice something subtle, too. Folded letters were meant to be opened slowly. They unfolded in stages, each flap revealing a little more, like petals of a flower. The reader was never bombarded. Instead, they were invited to read. It's the paper equivalent of knocking softly before entering. And so, the etiquette wasn't just about showing respect. It was about crafting an experience. One that matched the mood of the message, the status of the recipient, and the nature of the relationship. You didn't just say, I'm sorry. You folded that apology into every line. The scribe passes you one final sheet and gestures. Fold for gratitude, they might say. And you do. Not perfectly, but carefully. And in that crease, you feel something gentle settle into place. Paper, folded with feeling. You sit back now, your fingers aching slightly from all that folding. But the scribe leans in, eyes twinkling, as if to say, ready for a little danger. You raise an eyebrow. Danger? In a world of ink and paper? They nod. Tonight's lesson drifts into the shadows, into whispered rumors and midnight folds. Welcome to the world of ninja male myths. Let's get something straight. Not every story you hear about Edo Japan is historically accurate, especially the ones involving smoke bombs, roof flips, and black-clad spies intercepting secret letters with origami, level sleight of hand. But that doesn't mean the idea isn't fun or partially true. There were real fears about information leaks. Whether you were a merchant protecting trade secrets or a lord keeping political tensions under wraps, the risk was always there. Intercepted letters could mean ruined deals, failed uprisings, or worse, execution. So naturally, rumors spread about ninja, shinobi, trained not just in stealth and poisons, but in the delicate art of unfolding and refolding letters so precisely the recipient wouldn't suspect a thing. Historians still argue whether these so-called ninja folding techniques actually existed. Some say there are documented accounts of intercepted letters being resealed, especially in wartime. Others suggest it's more legend than fact, exaggerated by novels and kabuki plays, eager to spice up a slow-moving paper chase. But here's where things get interesting. Edo-era letters often used sophisticated folds, slits, tabs, multi-layer closures that made tampering genuinely difficult. These weren't just barriers of etiquette, they were booby traps for nosy fingers. Open the wrong flap first, crease in the wrong direction, the recipient would know. The folds became part of a low-tech security system. Some included inkless creases hidden inside. Fold a letter wrong while snooping and you'd accidentally reveal them. Others had layers that formed a lock when pressed flat. Without knowing the trick, you'd tear the paper trying to open it. One scholar discovered a merchant letter with 3 interior flaps, each folded at a slight offset and layered so they popped open in a particular order. The technique was called yatsuhashi, like the layered bridge shaped sweets from Kyoto. To get inside cleanly, you had to unfold each section exactly right. Miss one, and it all collapsed like a Jenga tower. Was this a spy deterrent? Possibly. Or just a particularly finicky merchant. There are recorded anecdotes, too. One courier arriving in Edo was found to have 3 letters hidden inside a hollow sandal sole. All 3 had been opened, clumsily refolded, and smelled faintly of river water. Whether it was a ninja, a greedy rival, or just a very sweaty messenger remains unclear. Another account speaks of a monk who intercepted letters between rival lords by bribing an innkeeper along the postal route. He'd carefully unfold the letters at night using a warm iron, just enough to relax the paper fibers, then read, recopy, and refold them before dawn. He was eventually caught, but not before learning an awful lot about the rice trade. And then there's the classic ninja folding tale. Clearly more myth than record, but too good to skip. A supposed shinobi was said to infiltrate enemy castles, not with weapons, but with counterfeit letters. He'd replace folded orders with his own, written in perfect script and sealed with uncanny accuracy. The messages ordered soldiers to abandon posts, delay attacks, or gather in the wrong places. Chaos ensued. Folded trickery as battlefield sabotage. True. Probably not. But plausible, you have to admit it's possible. After all, the folding styles weren't random. They were learned, practiced, and recognizable. A skilled forger who knew the fold might easily swap a message, especially if they had access to the right paper and crest stamps. More than one domain took this threat seriously. Some letters were double wrapped, folded once, then sealed inside a second letter or envelope. Others were reinforced with thread, tiny glue dots, or paper bands stamped with ink that would smear if disturbed. Folding became a form of document armor. It wasn't just about privacy, it was about control. In a society where hierarchy and information were tightly regulated, every crease mattered. If you couldn't protect your letters, you couldn't protect your power. There's even a late Edo satire play in which a paranoid lord spends so much time perfecting unbreakable letter folds that he forgets to read the actual messages. His castle falls, not from ninja sabotage, but from his own obsession with secrecy. Folded irony. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some sword schools, folding practice was part of training. Not because swordsmen needed to mail things, but because the mental discipline mirrored kata. Precise, repeatable, internalized motion. One fold wrong, try again. And again, until it was perfect. You're handed a letter now. Nothing dangerous, just a folded exercise. Try to open it. You do, carefully, but something feels off. You tug gently and the slit tears. The crease warps. You've just failed your first ninja mail challenge. The scribe smiles, then hands you another. Try again, because whether or not spies once slipped through shadows to swap out folded secrets, one thing is certain in Edo, Japan. The art of folding wasn't just polite, it was powerful. The mood shifts again. The scribe places a new sheet of paper in front of you, heavier, with an embossed edge, and offers a knowing glance. This isn't a love letter or a merchant's invoice. It's something bolder. A letter to the shogun. Pause for a second. Imagine what it must feel like to write to the single most powerful man in Japan. The Bakufu, the military government of the Tokugawa shogunate, governed nearly every aspect of life. From taxes to temple repairs to marriage permissions, the shogun's officials, or the shogun himself, were the final say. And yet, people wrote to him. Farmers, monks, samurai, even townsfolk when desperate enough. Petitions, complaints, appeals, and sometimes outright pleas, each folded with absolute precision. Because in this realm, form was everything. You peer at an old sample. It's tightly folded into a thick, rectangular block, sealed within a paper wrapper, tied with black cord. The outer sheet is blank. No name, no address, only a small square of brushwork on one corner. A signature seal. That's all you needed. Everyone knew where such letters were headed. But you didn't just mail something to Edo Castle like it was a birthday card. You submitted it at designated boxes, official petition stations, placed in cities and towns, sometimes discreet, sometimes right outside government offices. These boxes weren't just mail drops, they were symbolic thresholds. To submit a letter was to enter a dangerous conversation. There was an entire class of letters known as goisho, letters of public or political business, addressed to the shogunate. Most never reached the man himself, of course. They were opened by clerks, sorted by relevance, and reviewed by layers of bureaucrats. But the hope, the desperate hope, was that your words might ascend the mountain of paper to the highest peak. Historians still argue whether many of these letters were ever read by the shogun personally. Some scholars believe only messages from powerful daimyo or high-ranking samurai ever made it that far. Others point to examples where lower-class voices were shockingly acknowledged. There's one recorded case of a rice farmer in Suruga whose petition led to the review of an unjust tax. His letter, folded in the standard petition format, double, inward side folds, top flap straight down, edges pressed flat. Impeccable. You hold a recreation of that fold. It's firm, authoritative. Even the act of opening it feels formal. Each crease resists slightly, like the paper itself is reluctant to reveal too much too quickly. Then comes the phrasing. You couldn't just write, "Hey, this new tax is bogus." You opened with humility. With deepest respect, this lowly subject dares submit. And then you told your story, wrapped in layers of honorifics, metaphors, and careful distance. The tone was always deferential, but the content, often bold. These were letters that mixed poetry with protest. One quirk, some petitions were written in third person. Not "I ask," but "This humble servant wishes to report." A bit of literary camouflage. If your letter caused offense, maybe, just maybe, you could claim someone else wrote it on your behalf. And folding wasn't just etiquette here, it was protection. The wrong fold meant instant rejection. Unsealed or messy folds suggested disrespect. And if your letter appeared suspicious, officials might open it improperly on purpose, marking it tampered, and setting it aside. It's said that some scribes practiced folding for years before ever attempting to write a petition. Not the words, just the creases. The scribe now pulls out a replica of a famous letter, a 17th century appeal from a Buddhist temple pleading for land protection. The letter was folded 3 times inward, then once lengthwise, forming a narrow baton of paper. The outer layer had a printed crest, not the temple's own, but the crest of the local governor, showing it had passed through proper channels. This was critical. Without the correct endorsements, a letter wouldn't be taken seriously, no matter how beautiful the script or tragic the story. And then there were the anonymous letters. Dangerous business. These were sometimes slipped into petition boxes under cover of night, unfolded or folded too simply, unsigned, unsealed. Messages of corruption. Bribes exposed. Family betrayals. Whispered crimes. These were read, yes, but with suspicion. Their folds revealed their haste. There's one preserved letter from an anonymous writer who accused a tax collector of pocketing rice payments. The paper is rough, the handwriting jagged. The fold, sloppy and rushed. But what made it powerful was the timing. It arrived just as rumors were spreading. The accusation led to an inquiry, and the collector was quietly reassigned. Coincidence? Maybe. Power of the fold? Perhaps. You're handed a sheet now and told to fold a letter to power. You imagine yourself a lowly clerk, writing to protest the treatment of an elder. Your brush shakes a little. You write carefully. Then, fold by fold, you press your words into geometry. Side in, top down, edges squared. Final flap sealed with a palm's pressure. It's not just paper now. It's petition, purpose. And as the scribe nods, you sense the quiet thrill of rebellion, of tradition, of folding something meant to reach the highest place from the humblest hand. The room grows quiet again, but it's not the hush of study. It's something softer, heavier. The scribe moves aside, and a woman steps into the space. Her kimono is muted plum, her steps nearly silent. She bows deeply before settling on a cushion, and you realize tonight the letter comes from her hand. You're about to glimpse a world too often folded out of history. Edo-Era women, and the letters they wrote. You might assume wrongly that women in Edo Japan had no voice, no pen, no agency. But unfold the layers, and you'll find a paper trail of subtle power. Wives, daughters, widows, even Buddhist nuns. Many wrote letters with skill, grace, and surprising influence. The woman before you selects a pale washi sheet. She doesn't grind her own ink, it's already prepared. Her brushwork is fluid, curved, almost floral. You notice it immediately. This is on the woman's hand. A calligraphic style taught to girls in upper class households, all gentle loops and elegant spacing. It's not weaker, it's strategic. Some historians argue that this style was intended to reflect femininity. Others believe it was a code, a visual cue that told the reader, this letter comes from a woman, and you do well to treat it with delicacy. Either way, its beauty is undeniable. But what were women writing about? Everything. Mothers wrote to sons stationed in other domains. Daughters wrote to negotiate marriages. Yes, negotiate. Courtesans wrote heartbreakingly polite farewells to lost lovers. And aristocratic women. Some wielded real political sway through letters. One preserved example is from a wife of a daimyo who penned a folded message to her husband's advisor. It's full of formal language and social deference, but beneath the poetry is a clear directive. Rethink this alliance. The letter's folding style. Intricate. Triple layered with a locked flap and a slipped tab. A masterwork in feminine diplomacy. You try the fold yourself and immediately botch it. The inner flap buckles. The edge tears slightly. The scribe chuckles, but the woman simply smiles and shows you again. Gently, like a teacher correcting a student without words. One motion, two creases, a pivot of the wrist. This time, the letter folds like silk. Women's letters were often stored in kibishi, personal boxes of correspondence and poems. These boxes were rarely opened by anyone else. They contained memories, secrets, and sometimes unfinished thoughts. Some included dried flowers, tied silk threads, even hair, not because they were sentimental, though they were, but because letters were an extension of self. And for women, especially those confined by household duty, letters were freedom. One wife of a Kyoto merchant wrote dozens of letters to her childhood friend in Edo, folded neatly in small, layered bundles. The two never saw each other again, but their correspondence spanned 20 years. Some letters were only a few lines, others stretched into scrolls. All were kept, refolded, reread. There's even record of women influencing local politics through letters. A nun named Miki from a rural temple wrote to the magistrate of her province requesting land protection. Her letter was polite but firm, and folded in the formal style, typically reserved for petitions from male elders. It was taken seriously. The decision was reversed, power in ink. Respect increases. Historians still argue whether folding styles differed strictly by gender. Some suggest women were more elaborate, others believe style was more about education and region than gender identity. What is clear is that women owned the fold as much as men did. Some practiced poetic folds, where the letter, when opened, revealed a hidden verse in the center. Others used custom paper made with seasonal motifs, a crane for long life, a waterfall for flowing thoughts. Even the orientation of the letter could speak, folded top to bottom, conventional, diagonally from a corner, playful. Hidden meanings tucked between layers. And then there were farewell letters, not love notes, but final words. Women who knew they would never return, whether to a husband, a child, or a convent. sometimes left behind a folded letter, wrapped tightly, words left unsaid but preserved in crease. One such letter was found decades later, hidden in the lining of a wooden chest. It had never been opened. The paper had yellowed, but the folds remained intact. The family guessed it was from a daughter who had entered a distant temple, her life given to solitude. The letter was folded in a style rarely used open, and first, a sign of unfinished conversation. You run your fingers along a similar fold now. It feels different,
Not sad exactly.
but suspended, like a breath held between pages, and suddenly, you realize something profound. These women weren't excluded from the world of letter folding. They were shaping it, quietly, elegantly, from behind paper screens and within the structure of their time. They folded words that lasted. The sun is lower now, its rays softer, filtered amber through the shoji screens. The scribe begins to clear the table, but pauses at a low cabinet in the corner. From within, they draw out a cloth, wrapped bundle. Reverently, they place it before you. When unwrapped, it reveals something unexpected. Not a letter, but a collection of folded ones, a kind of archive. And tonight, you're about to watch history unfold. Literally, these are old letters. Very old. Yellowed edges, faded ink, delicate creases that hold their shape like bones beneath skin. And for a long time, no one touched them. Not because of disinterest, but because no one knew how. Enter modern scholars and conservators, armed with magnifying glasses, tweezers, and the collective patience of 1,000 monks. This is the age of rediscovery. The letters of Edo didn't just carry words. They carried folds, and those folds are finally being read again. In recent years, researchers have begun cataloging ancient Japanese letter folds as a kind of structural language. Like origami with secrets, they use terms like sokumana's side fold, tatamigami's folded paper style, and kakushi ori's hidden fold. Some even scan the folds digitally, creating 3D models before attempting to open the original documents. You watch as the scribe gently opens one such letter with a bamboo spatula, not tearing or peeling, but coaxing the paper open. It unfolds in segments, like a stage revealing its actors. The layers reveal more than ink, they reveal emotion. Hesitation in the pauses, confidence in the sharp creases, humor, maybe, in the playful angle of the final tuck. One famous rediscovery came from a temple archive, a stash of 78 letters dating back to the late Edo period. Some were family notes, others were legal petitions. Many had been left unread for generations because no one could open them properly. Once conservators studied the folds, they realized they were dealing with multiple folding dialects, regional variations passed down like family recipes. Historians still argue whether these fold patterns were systematized or spontaneous. Did writers invent their own, or follow local tradition? The answer seems to be both. Much like handwriting, the fold became a kind of signature, half-learned, half-lived. And then there's the curious case of the misfolded mystery. In 2017, a folded letter believed to be a court report was found to be folded backwards, not just by mistake. It was deliberate. The folds, when reversed, revealed a second message written in invisible ink. A trick, a joke, a warning. Scholars are still decoding it. But it shows just how layered, literally, these letters could be. There's also a rising field of fold forensics. Researchers look at wear patterns to guess how many times a letter was opened. A love letter opened 100 times has creases so soft they feel like fabric. A rejected proposal might still be sealed, never opened at all. The fold becomes the emotion. Some scholars even study the muscle memory of folding, how different social classes folded letters based on desk height, paper thickness, and posture. Samurai folds were often tighter, as their desks were taller, and their sleeves less billowy. Courtesans used folds that could be opened with one hand, useful for privacy during business transactions. You watch as the scribe unfolds another letter. This one has a floral watermark that only appears in the right light. It's from a merchant's daughter, folded into a clever triangle with a hidden note tucked inside. a kind of pop-up paper hug. The note reads simply, "Until next spring." Folded longing. You pick up a modern booklet, recently published, on historical folds. It contains diagrams, crease maps, and even QR codes linking to video tutorials. You never thought you'd find a YouTube playlist for 18th century petition folding styles. But here we are, and there's a movement now, slow but steady, to revive these folds, not just as history, but as practice. Calligraphy studios across Japan have begun offering classes on Edo-style letter folding. Some teach it alongside tea ceremony. Others pair it with haiku writing, because folding isn't dead, it's sleeping, and it's beginning to stir. One final fold is placed before you. It's new, made just now, but in the style of a centuries-old technique, a memorial fold. Wide at the base, narrow at the top, with a single soft crease in the middle, like a bowed head, no message inside, just intention. And you understand something? All this folding, the formality, the secrecy, the artistry, it wasn't just about communication. It was about preservation, preserving dignity, emotion, memory, connection. The folds made sure the message wasn't just read. It was felt. And in unfolding these forgotten styles, we aren't just restoring paper. We're restoring people. Their quirks, their fears, their hopes, creased gently into corners of washi, now brushed with light again. The air is heavy now, not with tension, but with something gentler. Reverence, maybe. The scribe reaches for one final letter. This one isn't from a bundle, nor freshly written. It's wrapped in dark cloth, tied with a worn silk cord, and handled with both hands. The motion is slow, and something in the room shifts. Even the shadows seem to pause. You're about to witness the last folded goodbye. The letter is from a samurai, written on the eve of a battle he likely didn't expect to return from. It's not a dramatic document. There are no sweeping declarations or battlefield poetry. It's quiet. Personal. A farewell, he wrote it at night or lamplight with hands that might have trembled. The paper is slightly crinkled. Not from haste, but from emotion. His script is sharp and controlled, but you sense hesitation in the spacing. Perhaps he paused after each line, collecting himself. The letter isn't long. It begins with a simple address, to my wife. Then, a few lines about the past, shared moments, apologies for absences, gratitude for meals, and patience. He asks her to keep living fully, to remember the spring evenings they sat under the plum tree. There's no mention of honor or death, only life, memory, soft words folded with sharp hands. And then, the folding. This letter was folded with ritual. Side folds first, then an upward tuck. A final triangle closes it, pointing inward, a sign of humility. No slit, no seal. Just the pressure of the final crease holding it shut. It was never opened. She kept it folded. Always. Somehow, this letter was preserved. Passed down through daughters, granddaughters, tucked in a lacquer box lined with silk. Not to be read, just to be held, because sometimes a folded letter becomes something else. A relic, a promise, a presence. You hold it now? Not the original, of course, but a perfect replica. Even this copy hums with stillness. The folds are delicate but firm, the creases clean. It weighs almost nothing. And yet it carries everything. Historians still argue whether these death letters were a common practice among samurai. Some believe they were rare and deeply personal. Others suggest they were part of standard preparation. Armor polished, blade cleaned, letter folded, like tying sandals before battle. Regardless, the ritual mattered. The folding was a final act of control in a world about to become chaos. A paper shield against the unknown. And the wives who received them, they didn't unfold the letters in front of others. Some didn't read them at all. To open the letter was to acknowledge the loss. To keep it folded was to preserve the last moment when hope still flickered. In some cases, these letters were buried with the women when they passed, still sealed. One letter was found during a temple restoration, tucked behind a statue. It was wrapped in silk and tied with string. The script was faint, but the folds were clear. A farewell, untouched. You sit quietly, the letter in your hands. It doesn't beg to be opened. It just is. Still. Present. The paper is warm from your palm, and you realize this, too, is a form of presence. A person reduced to ink and creases, folded gently into memory. The scribe rises and begins tidying the space. The inkstone is rinsed. The brushes are hung. The paper is returned to its drawers. Everything is restored to order, but you don't move just yet. You sit a little longer, letter on your lap, as the last of the light fades through the screen. Outside, a breeze stirs the garden. A cicada hums. The world is slow again. And maybe you think that's the true magic of these letters. They don't demand attention. They ask for time. They ask you to slow down, to feel the pause between words, to respect the silence of the fold. So much care, wrapped in so little paper. So many goodbyes, sealed with a crease. And now, as we close our eyes to the paper, bound dreams of Edo, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften like worn washi. The letters are folded, the ink dried, the messengers already lost to twilight roads. That last farewell, carefully tucked and pressed, lingers like a whisper in the stillness. Picture the quiet of a tatami room, the flicker of an oil lamp. Outside, wind moves through bamboo. Inside, a folded letter rests untouched on a wooden tray. There's no urgency, no voice calling. Only presence. Only paper, holding the shape of what someone once felt. Let your body ease into stillness now, like ink settling into fiber. Let the folds of your mind relax. There's no message to send tonight, no reply to write, just memory, soft and steady, as the paper closes around it. And if you dream tonight, maybe it will be of a slow journey, a quiet courier jogging through mist, a folded note cradled in his sash. Maybe you'll dream of letters that never needed words, just the gentle precision of care, creased corner to corner. So rest, unfold, and if any part of this history lingers in you, let it be the softness, the quiet dedication, the knowledge that even in a world of silence and structure, a folded message could still carry love. Good night, paper travelers.